Good evening and welcome to RFL. We begin with breaking news. After nearly 2 years, Robert Mueller has finally finished his probe into possible collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. The Attorney General saying he may notify of Congress of the, quote, principal conclusions as soon as this weekend. We have a lot to get to in this hour. We're going to begin with a live report from Washington, and for that, we turn to ABC News reporter Mona Kozar-Abdi. Good evening, Mona.
In a letter to Congress sent within the hour, Attorney General William Barr says the special counsel has handed him the full report on the Russia investigation 22 months after the probe began. The Mueller report is now in the hands of Attorney General William Barr. In a letter to the chairs of key congressional committees, Barr wrote that Mueller explained his prosecutorial decisions and said there were no instances in the course of the investigation in which any of his decisions were vetoed by his superiors at the Justice Department. Still, Democratic lawmakers want more information in tweets pressing Barr to release the entire report to the American people. In the course of the investigation into Russian collusion, Special Counsel Robert Mueller has provided 37 indictments, including 26 Russians, and he has secured guilty pleas from 7 individuals, including former Trump campaign chair Paul Manafort, Deputy Trump campaign manager Rick Gates, former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, and the president's longtime personal attorney Michael Cohen.
He knows the truth. I know the truth. Others know the truth. And it's sad that I should take responsibility for his dirty deeds.
Mueller was appointed in May 2017 after President Trump suddenly fired FBI Director James Comey. Initially, the president said he fired Comey on the recommendation of justice officials, but then told NBC that the Russia investigation played a part in firing Comey.
Regardless of recommendation, I was going to fire Comey. I said, you know, this Russia thing with Trump and Russia is a made-up story.
At that point, many Republicans joined Democrats in calling for an independent investigation.
The White House's timing here was less than impeccable.
Comey was leading an investigation in whether the Trump campaign colluded with the Russians, a serious offense. Were those investigations getting too close to home for the president?
Through it all, the president has maintained his innocence.
There was no collusion, there was no obstruction, there was no nothing.
We are also hearing from the president's legal team. They say they are pleased that the special counsel has handed over the report to Attorney General William Barr, and from there, Barr will determine appropriate next steps. Mona Kozar-Abdi, ABC News, Washington. Back to you.
All right, Mona, thank you very much. One more bit of information to add, and that is that a DOJ official, a Department of Justice official, telling CNN a few moments ago there will be no other indictments coming from Mueller or Mueller's team of prosecutors. Let's get some insight and analysis. We'll be doing that for the rest of the hour, and we'll begin with former federal prosecutor Roland Riopel, who joins us now live. Hi, Roland.
Hey, Andrew, how are you?
I'm doing well. A busy night for us all. Given that Robert Mueller's charge was to focus on Russian interference and obstruction, and that we're getting word that there will be no more indictments, are we at a case of what we know now is all we're going to get? Everything that's in the public eye now, that's what we got and nothing more?
I think that's probably true with respect to indictments, Andrew, but there's a great deal of information that Mr. Mueller has gathered that I'm sure we do not know. And I am confident that we will learn things from the Mueller report that we do not know today. So I'm going to be very interested to see what Mr. Mueller's conclusions are and what the additional information is that he's gathered that we don't know as we speak now.
What kinds of things would you be interested in learning? What will you be looking for when you finally get to look at the report?
Well, yeah, I think there may be information about connections to Russia and Russian connections to the Trump campaign that we're simply not aware of as we sit here now. You know, there's that meeting in the Seychelles between Eric Prince and Russians. I think we'll know a little bit more about that. There are lots of contacts between Russia and the Trump campaign that I'm sure Mr. Mueller has investigated thoroughly, and we'll know more about that. There are all kinds of emails, text messages, and things like that that we have no access to now. I'm sure we'll find out more about that, and it may be that the tapping of Carter Page's phone will be a feature of the Mueller report, and we may find out more about what calls were intercepted on that telephone.
Roland, stay put. We'll come back to you in just a second. We want to shift gears very quickly. Presidential historian Alan Lichtman is joining us on the phone. Alan is also the author of The Case for Impeachment. And Alan, first of all, your reaction hearing that the Mueller report is now in the hands of the Attorney General.
Well, I think the Mueller investigation has the potential to being the biggest disappointment since the opening of the Al Capone secret vaults, which turned into nothing. All the indictments have been peripheral. None of them involve the core of the investigation, the corruption of our democracy by a possible conspiracy between members of the campaign and the Russians. And even based on what's publicly known, it strikes me that there's more than enough to move forward on that front. And the problem with the report is we're never going to see it, or if we do, it's going to be a year or more, because Attorney General Barr has made it clear he's not releasing it. He's just going to give us a summary. That means the only way we're going to get it is there's lawsuits, and those lawsuits could drag on to the end of the Trump term. And so all we're going to get for the next year or two is spin.
And that will sort of open the door to the question, Alan, as to whether this is just whether Russian connections is something that Mueller simply couldn't prove, or whether there was actually no there, and we may never know the answer to that.
We may never know the answer to that. The only way we would know the answer to that is to see every line of the report in full. And if that's ever going to happen, it's a long way down the road. I'm going to have a long beard grown by then.
You're a presidential historian, Alan. Can you think of any similar moments or any similar reports in presidential history that jump to mind?
Well, of course, there was the Ken Starr report that led to the impeachment of Bill Clinton, but Ken Starr was truly operating under law. He was operating under the independent counsel law. He was not a creature of the Department of Justice or the administration. He was appointed by a panel of federal judges. Unfortunately, that law was lapsed, and now Mueller is, in fact, an appointee of the Department of Justice, and really ultimately in the sense of the president, and his report is now in the control of political appointees. That's just horrific.
Alan, you've written a book about the case for impeachment when it comes to Donald Trump. A lot of Democrats and a lot of Democratic voters were sort of hanging on the Mueller report. That might be the smoking gun piece of evidence that they thought would lead to impeachment. If everything that we're reporting holds, that there will be no additional indictments and that what we know now is all we're going to get out of this thing, does that, to your mind, take the starch out of some of those pushes for impeachment? Do you think that the House should continue to push that way?
Absolutely. You know, the Mueller investigation really has nothing to do with impeachment. He's not an impeachment investigator. He's investigating crimes. Impeachment does not require an indictable crime. The framers were quite clear about that. Hey, you know, the statute law on crime changes all the time. You know, back in the day when they framed the Constitution, there were no campaign finance laws. Impeachment involves a fundamental abuse of power, and that investigation is not up to the special counsel. It's up to the House of Representatives. And I would be very disappointed if the Democrats didn't have enough spine and enough backbone to fulfill their constitutional duty and launch an impeachment investigation of their own. To kick the ball over to Mueller is just a capitulation of the constitutional responsibility of the U.S. House of Representatives. The framers, for good reason, gave the House sole authority over impeachment, not a special counsel.
Presidential historian Alan Lichtman. Alan, thank you very much for calling in, and thanks for the insight over the last few weeks, and of course, again tonight. Really appreciate it. I want to go right back now to Roland Riopel, the former federal prosecutor who continues to join us live from our New York studios. Roland, first of all, any chance, based on what we know, that you think there might be a bombshell in the Mueller report that we just don't know about at this point? Or again, it looks pretty cut and dry. What we know now is what we're going to get.
You know, it's just very hard to predict, Andrew. There may be things in the Mueller report in terms, one thing that occurs to me is forensic computer analysis. You know, that is a specialty of Mr. Mueller. There may be things in there that we just are not aware of in any way. We're going to have to wait until we see Mr. Barr's summary and ultimately someday the report itself. And I think we'll probably have Mr. Mueller testifying about it before Congress before too long as well. So we'll learn a lot of the substance of it, but it's just impossible right now to know if there's more than we know or if what's come out in the public so far is all there is.
If the reporting of no additional indictments is correct, and again, a Department of Justice official telling CNN that, and we're reporting their report, you got to think that Donald Trump Jr., Eric Trump, Jared Kushner, there's probably a host of people in Trump's orbit who are breathing a sigh of relief tonight.
Yes, I think that's right. I think everybody who had connection to the Russians, who was interviewed by Mr. Mueller, all of those people had to be worried that something they said to Mr. Mueller was not accurate and could be charged as a false statement. All of those people had to be worried that if Mr. Mueller was going to charge a giant conspiracy to manipulate the election that included members of the Trump family, they might be charged. I think this is a very positive development for them, that none of those individuals have been charged. They will be sighing a big sigh of relief. Yeah.
I've been kicking around this question for the last couple of weeks, Roland, and I know you and I have talked about it, but I want to bring it up again because the Mueller report, what he handed over to the Attorney General Barr today, will include what's been prosecuted and why, and what hasn't been prosecuted and why, and we may never see that information, but we know that there are guidelines that say you cannot indict or prosecute a sitting president. So even if there was stuff that for any other person in the country might have been enough to charge or go after Donald Trump, we're not going to do it. And then we're not going to share that information because we don't share information about people we haven't filed federal charges with. Take me and talk to the audience a little bit about that potential conflict there about, stuff that falls just short of criminality or might be criminal for anybody other than the president.
Well, I do think that a lot of the conduct will be disclosed in the report. It won't be labeled criminal conduct and no indictment will be returned, but it'll all be fodder for Congress to investigate. Congress will get the substance of the Mueller report. It can follow up on it, and it has an independent duty to do an investigation to decide whether impeachment is a proper thing to do. Congress is just beginning that process now, and the Mueller report may well give them a guide as to where they ought to go next.
But what are the odds that the Mueller report won't give them that guidance, Roland, only because the Justice Department tries not to, or at least there's a guideline that says they're not going to tarnish the image of somebody who's not being charged with a crime, and we know by definition that includes the president?
Well, again, there's going to be lots of detail in the report whether or not Donald Trump is charged. There's going to have to be a lengthy discussion of his statements. There's going to have to be a lengthy explanation of why Mr. Mueller chose not to call him as a witness and follow through with a subpoena. All of that information is going to be of great interest to Congress. And while the public may not see it all, Congress is likely to see a good deal more than will be released to us. So I do think there will be lots of material in that report that may warrant Congress following up on.
Multiple sources now, Roland, are quoting Department of Justice officials saying that the White House was not given the Mueller report. They were only given a readout of the letter to be sent to the Hill, with Attorney General Barr's chief of staff reading out that letter to the White House counsel's office. We know that the White House is going to review the report looking for potential areas of privileged information and also classified information. My question to you is, will the president see this report? Should he or should he not see it? Will his legal team see it? Will Rudy Giuliani see it?
I think they likely will see it. They have the right to see what goes on at the Department of Justice. So I think they will see the report. They will review the report. They may make arguments that some part of the report is subject to executive privilege or some similar reason for why it ought not to be disclosed. But, I think I trust Mr. Barr to take his duties very, very seriously to communicate the substance of the report to Congress.
One last question for you, Roland, and that is that Mueller's office is now closing up shop, and his attorneys are beginning to filter back to their previous positions. In the process of putting together a 2-year investigation, there's going to be all sorts of evidence and documents and tapes and email readouts and that sort of thing. Do we know, or do you know, based off your experience, what happens to that stuff? Who winds up in control of it? And we know that it won't be tampered with or disappeared?
Well, that stuff will be preserved at the Department of Justice as evidence in any grand jury investigation is preserved. In theory, Andrew, it's always possible that some bad actor would destroy it or do something to prevent its perpetuation, but I think that's unlikely. There are professionals at the Department of Justice who are tasked with taking care of the evidence, and they'll do so. So it'll be around.
Roland Riopel, not just a former federal prosecutor, but he's been our man on the Mueller investigation since day one. Thank you for joining us on the night that it drops, Roland, and I'm sure we'll see you in the days to come as we figure out what's actually in there and what information we're learning. Thanks, Roland.
Okay, pleasure to be with you, Andrew.
All right, we'll take a quick break here on RFL, and we'll have more on the release of the Mueller report, at least to the Attorney General of the United States, right after this.